Now let's look at our step two, which is how operations affect financials, right? Alternatively, we can answer the question, right, of what is the strategic importance of operations and supply chains. Okay, now, of course, I'm going to show you this famous graph. I'm sure everybody knows this, but not from the financials perspective. Okay, so the value chain, right? The value chain actually has many three stages from factory, right, that take the components and raw materials from suppliers, right, to assemble them into finished products. And here we incur the cost of goods sold. And the next step is distribution, right? We distribute finished products, right, through a network of warehouses, for example, right, to our ultimately to our sales channels, right, sales outlets. And during distribution, we incur sales, general, and administrative expenses, right, before the products arrive at the sales outlet to generate revenue. And the reason I want to show you this graph is because I want to, well, sure everyone knows that, right? I want to show you how net income was generated. Very simply, we have the total revenue, right? Subtract the cost of goods sold, right? Which will give you the gross profit. Then you further subtract SG&A and R&D and many other cost components, and you'll get net income, right? And so from here you can see how the financials are connected to operations, right? Because what affects the cost of goods sold? It's sourcing, supply management, right? It's an important function of supply chain management. And of course, production, quality management. And that's another important functional area, right, in supply chain operations. And for SG&A, what affects SG&A? That's logistics, distribution, right, including transportation, inventories, and so on, and selling. Right. So and from this picture, you can see how operations supply chain, right, directly affect the cost components. By the way, from the next slide, we can see cost of goods sold and SG&A, right, are often the largest two cost components, right, for any company, right? So here you can see how operation supply chain directly affects the cost and how the cost contributes or affect the net income. Okay. Now let's look at the data. Right. The question is how important, right, are cost of goods sold and SG&A for a typical company? Of course, this is case by case, depends on different industries. Here, I'd like to come back to my interactive chart so I can show you how important they are. So let me first use United States as an example. So essentially, I break down the revenue, the average revenue, right, of these 11 different industry sectors, right, into their cost components. So let's first look at cost of goods sold, right, for the US. And you can clearly see out of these 11 major industry sectors, right, cost of goods sold is the largest cost component, right, in all of them except one. Do you know which one? So there's only one industry sector that cost of goods sold is not the biggest cost component. And that industry is, yes, you're right, it's financials. For financials, only 7.5%, right? SG&A accounts for a much bigger percentage. But other than financials, for all the other industry sectors, right, cost of goods sold is the largest cost component. And out of these 11 major sectors, there are 8 of them, in 8 industry sectors, the cost of goods sold accounts for more than 50%, 50% of the revenue, right? So we can see that financials is not, right? And real estate and telecom, cost of goods sold accounts for less than 50% of revenue. But for all the others, right, cost of goods sold accounts for more than 50% of the revenue. So let's now look at SG&A, right? Sales general and administrative cost, although smaller than cost of goods sold, but often the second largest cost component, except utilities. Look at here, right? Utilities has smaller SG&A, right? It's not the second largest cost component, just for utilities. But for all the others, right, it's the second largest cost component, right? Now just for your interest, right? If you look at R&D, now we see US firms do a lot of R&D, right? It turns out R&D is only sizable or recognizable in only two industry sectors, which is healthcare plus information technology. Now, I'm not saying other industries do not do R&D. They just look at their spending on R&D as a percentage of revenue. It's not significant. Okay. Now, finally, let's look at the net income. Now, it looks like information technology has highest net income. Oh, not financials. I'm sorry. Financials has the highest net income, it's about 17%. IT has about 15%. Now, healthcare is not, okay, it doesn't have a lot of, they don't make a lot of money in general. If you combine all the healthcare firms together, right, from the healthcare facilities to medical device, right, to pharmaceuticals, everybody together, the average is not very high. So a small change in the cost of goods sold or cost of revenue, right, could have a significant impact on the net income, right, given their percentage of the revenue, right? So let's look at if we could improve, let's say, cost of goods sold just by 1% for some industries, how much their net income might improve, right? Let's say, for example, consumer staples, right? The cost of goods sold accounts for 75% of the revenue. 75%, that's 3/4, right? So 1% of saving in cost of goods sold, right? That's about 0.75% of the revenue, right? And their net income is only 4.16% of the revenue. So 0.75 divided by 4.16%, and you get like 18% increase in net income. Right? 1% saving in cost of goods sold will give you 18% increase in net income. And of course, equivalently, right, the similar increase in stock price. Right, that's for consumer staples. What about healthcare? Now, for healthcare, the cost of goods sold is a much smaller portion, but still 55, almost 56%. Right? Do the same calculation, right? 1% saving in cost of goods sold will increase net income by 16%. Now, this is across the industry average. Now, for more specific industries, let's say pharmaceuticals or life sciences, right? You have to do another calculation. Now, finally, let's look at materials. That's the chemicals, the metals, right, and so on, including construction materials. Now, 1% savings, right, will lead to 13% increase in net income. Now, you can tell students how important, right, supply chain management is, or operation is. A small percentage, right, of the savings in the cost, right, of operations and supply chains, right, will lead to a significant increase in net income and consequently the stock price. Let's look at another country, which is China. Now, similarly, we plot out the revenue breakdowns for all these 11 different industry sectors. Right? We can see two differences. The first, of course, we confirm the importance of cost of goods sold and SG&A. Okay, and the two differences is if you look at numbers carefully, you'll find out, right? For China, for 8 out of 11 industry sectors, right, cost of goods sold accounts for a higher percentage of the revenue than United States, which means supply chains operations is more important for this country. Right, so they are consumer discretionary, right? and healthcare industries, industrials, information technology, and so on and so forth. Except consumer staples, China has a slightly smaller, right, cost of goods sold percentage. And for energy, it's about the same as the United States, right? I didn't include financials because SGA is not, I'm sorry, cost of goods sold is not that important. Now, that's the first observation. And the second observation is if you look at the three state-owned enterprises dominated industries, that's energy, financial services, and telecom, right? These industries has the highest profit margins. In fact, if you look at financials making 25% revenue as their net margin, which is amazing. Okay, now let's look at one last example is India. Now, similarly, we find similar importance of cost of goods sold, right, and SG&A, right, for India industries. Now, one noticeable difference is India's energy sector, right, which is far greater, right, than the other industries in terms of average size, right, and also in terms of the cost of goods sold. It has the highest percentage of the revenue, 85, almost 85%, right? So I think this is the tipping point of India's economy, right? Let's say for this industry, operations and supply chain management is just so important, right? 1% saving, right, in cost of goods sold for India's energy sector will lead to 19%, almost 20% increase in net income. And of course, consequently, the similar increase in stock market performance. So I think I can say this, right? If we can improve India's energy sector just by a small percentage in terms of its operations or supply chain management, it's going to have a significant impact, not only on India's energy sector, right, in terms of profitability and the stock market performance, but also will contribute, right, significantly to this country's overall economy, right, because energy is the upstream of all these other industries. To help companies, right, improve sourcing and supply management, and we developed a new course module which is called sourcing analytics, right, which combines the classic topic in sourcing and procurement, right, with data analysis. The learning objectives are the follows, right? The objective, of course, is to help companies reduce, right, the cost of goods sold, right, without sacrifice, of course, the quality of the product and services, right? So to break it down, right, it has three parts, right? Supplier intelligence, right, which essentially tells students how to explore and select suppliers globally. This, of course, needs a lot of data. And also assessing the bargaining power, right? So you know the cards, right, in the hands of your suppliers, right? So by measuring the leverage and negotiation power, right, how much your supplier can concede, for example, in terms of during negotiation. And finally, right, you could find a lot of suppliers need to benchmark the suppliers, the comparison side by side, right, in terms of their pricing, right, their risk, right, and also supplying capabilities. Now, the case study we used in the sourcing analytics in this course module is Apple iPhone CPU sourcing, right, and data analysis, right. So this module, right, will give, if you go through the procedures of this module, it will give you a similar decisions or result as Apple's actual decision. We just talk about the importance of cost of goods sold, but sometimes, right, companies in the same industries, they have the same supply base, right, and also production technology, right. So meaning it's hard to improve sometimes on cost of goods sold, right. One example is the computer industry in the US, right. They have the same suppliers essentially, right. For example, CPUs, operating systems all come from the same supplier. And they are not really competing on cost of goods sold. They are competing on customer service and SG&A. Right? SG&A, although it's smaller than cost of goods sold, right, but can play a crucial or critical role in competition. Let me give a illustrative example. Okay, let's say company A and B that offering the same product in the same markets, but have very different cost structure, right? And for company A, now you can see the cost of the sales general and administrative expenses, which is in red, accounts for 33% of the revenue. For company B, only about 10%. Right? If you can squeeze, let's say, your sales general administrative expenses from 33% to about 10%, right? Although sometimes not even by that much, squeeze just by a little bit, you could achieve significant results, right? Right? You can either pocket, right, all the profits, or you can lower your pricing, right? Which that's going to increase the cost of goods sold as a percentage of the revenue, right? And so you can get more market share. And of course, you could do both in the same time, right? Reduce pricing and also make more money in the same time, right? And in this way, you can dominate the market, right? By the way, company A here is Macy, and company B here is Amazon. All right. So let's look at our first example: Compaq versus Dell, right? Compaq sold itself in around year 2000, but at which time it was a market leader, right? And it's very hard to understand why Compaq sold itself. Let's look at the data. And here's the $24 billion insight. Now, Compaq, looking at this data, you could find a deep secret. And Compaq clearly understand what was going on and sold itself for $24 billion. The buyer and everybody else, most everybody else, of course, didn't understand really this data and made the wrong decision. Now, so what is the secret behind this data? Let's look at this data. Not too much numbers here, right? So let's look at Compaq versus Dell, right? Data in financial data in year 2000, right? The gross margin of Compaq is about 23%. Dell is about 20%, right? But Dell is operationally more efficient, right? Especially from the inventory's perspective. Right? With 6 days inventory, Compaq about 25 days, right? That translates to different operating costs, right? For Compaq, it's about 14%, Dell 10%. So do the math, right? Subtracting operating costs from gross margin, you find out they'll outperform Compaq by about 1% in operating margin. So the question is, why Compaq sold itself? Right? Now, the trick of understanding this data is not to look at this data in isolation. Is really to combine them together. For two companies selling roughly the same product in the same market, they have different gross margin. It really means two things, right? First is either Compaq has better deal from suppliers, right? So, they get lower cost of goods sold, or they price higher. But we just said they have the same production technology and same suppliers, right? So the different gross margin really means Compaq actually sold its product at a higher price. And with a higher price, and they made less money because of their operation inefficiency. That's why Compaq felt it won't be able to win this competition. It didn't see any hope to win out in the end, right? That's why it gave up. In this case, Dell not only has lower price, that's why the market is shifting towards Dell constantly, right? It also it is also making more money, more profit. So if Compaq wants to reduce price or get into a price war, they will be happy to indulge it, right? Because it has more room for price concession. Now let's look at a more recent example, which is Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Corporation, TSM, versus Intel, right? What do we find out is, right, if you look at the semiconductor industry data, the profitability data, about 5-6 years ago, right, Intel's current situation is even worse. So we look at Intel versus TSMC, right, comparing their operating margin versus gross margin. We can see that Intel has higher gross margin, but with higher gross margin, it's making less money. It's making less operating margin. Right? I'm not saying Intel is not a company. I hope it's not. But TSMC does have a significant advantage in terms of operating efficiency. Right? With a lower gross margin, it's making a higher operating margin. Our more recent example from 2023, we see exact same, we can make the exact same observation. Right? First, we observe Amazon has higher percentage of cost of goods sold than Walmart. Amazon is about 84%, Walmart 75%. And they're retailers, right? So what they do, they don't have a lot of manufacturing inside, so they pretty much just get the materials or the products from suppliers and resell it to the customers. Right? Of course, there's a lot of operations going on here because distribution, inventory, shelf, uploading and so on, a lot of work to do. And by just looking at their cost of goods sold, you can see Walmart will make up their price much higher than Amazon, right? So they take the product from suppliers and then resell to us. Okay, the markup for Walmart is about 33%. So if the item costs $100 from the suppliers, you are going to pay $132 at Walmart. But for Amazon, you're going to pay $120 because of this and the percentage of cost of goods sold. Okay, so Amazon is selling its product at lower price. However, it's actually making higher profit than Walmart and net income, right? How could Amazon do that? Well, you know the answer, right? SG&A made a difference in this case. And what contributes to SG&A? And from a retailing perspective, inventory is extremely important. Actually, you could, in the next slide, you'll find out inventory actually is a major contributor to Amazon's efficiency in operations, in SG&A. So, and that's our inventory analytics course module. So to help companies better manage inventories and achieve phenomenal results, right? We combine classical topics in inventory management with data analytics. And the learning objective here is not only problem solving, right? Solve inventory problems, but also, more importantly, to discover inventory problems, right? So the course module has 3 objectives to break down. And first is to find out, of course, from vast data, right? For which industries and countries is inventory relevant and important? This is actually a very interesting question because I used to teach in our New World campus. My students, most of them come from Wall Street, right? In financial services. They just cannot understand why inventory is important because they don't have any inventory, right? But okay, it's true for financials, or especially banking, insurance and so on. You don't have much inventory to talk about, right? But for some other industries like retailing, right, manufacturing, inventory is very important. So we need to tell students, right, where to look for inventory problems. And second, right, how may inventory drive a company's financial performance? Even if you have a lot of inventories, right, you need to find out, right, if you work on inventory, does that pay off? Right? You spend a lot of money, effort to improve inventories, will that eventually lead to a financial outcome? Right? That's what you need to find out. Okay, and finally, inventory is important to you. Inventory does have an impact on your bottom line. You may not have an inventory problem. So I don't know how many of you ask yourself this question, right? How do I know if I have an inventory problem? You may not, because you may already be operating at optimal or close to optimal, right? There is very little room for further improvements. It could be, how do you know? The question is, right? Of course, the answer is very simple. It's benchmarking. Compare yourself, right, with your competitors, right? To look at their inventory turnover or inventory dates, you immediately have an idea, right? Of course, this requires a lot of data. Right, the case study for this cost module is Amazon versus Macy's, right? We're going to show you, right? So students will learn by playing with the data, right? How Amazon went off. That is, reduce, get more market share, right? Grow faster, by low pricing but still making more money, right? By effective inventory management. So as a result of better operations management, right? Amazon could had a much higher stock price growth in the past 7 years. Actually, its market cap is far bigger than Walmart, although its revenue is still smaller than Walmart. Right. So in the past 7 years, Amazon's stock price grew by 500%, and Walmart by about 200%. Now let's look at Amazon. Here's a huge swing, right? And let's try to find out what was going on here.